Without further ado, I'm happy to introduce Josh Constantine, our moderator for tonight on the changing landscapes of social media, and our other two speakers who are going to introduce themselves. It's Tamara Mendelsohn and Vanessa Camones, but they'll give you a little bit of background. Thanks so much, guys.
Hello. Thank you guys all for coming. I know there's probably a ton of places you could be right now, but I'm really excited to get to talk with you about, they call it Failcon, Failchat, but I want this to be more like experiment chat, because, social media, it goes away so fast that unless you say something really offensive, it's okay to fail. And I think that's what we're going to get into tonight, is how you can experiment and sort of push your boundaries in terms of creating content that represents your brand and is compelling and people actually want to see. It doesn't feel like ads or spam, but without getting yourself in any trouble. So I'd like to have my panelists introduce themselves, and I'll talk a little bit about myself and the panel after that.
Thank you, Josh. My name is Tamara Mendelsohn, and I run marketing for Eventbrite. I've been there for a little over 6 years now. And for those of you that aren't familiar with Eventbrite, we started the service literally 7-8 years ago as a tool for event organizers to sell tickets online to their events. But because we developed the technology in such a way that literally anyone anywhere could use Eventbrite for any type of event, what we found was an amazing breadth and depth of events that were using our platform. And so now we're in the process of actually transforming into much more of a marketplace, a place where people can come to discover all the amazing things that are happening around them. And so we've gone from being sort of a B2B brand to actually transitioning into much more of a B2C world. And it's been interesting to think about, as we were chatting beforehand for this panel, how that transition has implications on how you do social media marketing.
My name is Vanessa Camones. I run an agency. I founded an agency here in San Francisco called The Mix, and we're a boutique marketing consulting firm. Started the firm in 2007, and since then have obviously worked with a ton of companies, startups, medium-sized business, B2B, B2C, you name it. So I feel we've been around for a while and have done a ton of fails and successes in social media and content and all that good stuff, PR as well. So happy to share some of my insights and answer some of the questions you have.
And I am Josh Constantine, and I have a master's degree in social media from Stanford. Kind of. I designed this master's program called Cyber Sociology to look at how humans interact over the internet, everything from meme popularity cycles to privacy controls. And from there, I went on to write for a blog called Inside Facebook, where I was covering social media marketing specifically for a few years before I got poached by TechCrunch, and I've been there for 3.5 years writing about social media with a specialty in Facebook, but also the wider creator ecosystem, as well as advertising and marketing, plus like drones and virtual reality and lots of fun stuff like that. So what I want to talk about today is how you can think about your brand in a way that isn't just pushing the hard sell. It's about making people like you, not necessarily making people buy from you right away. And I think that that's one of the biggest misconceptions in how social media marketing works, is that people think of it as, oh, this is an amazing channel where I can send ads for free. But that's not how it works, because really what social media is about engagement, it's about resharing, it's about content getting more visibility if it's high quality. And so just pushing things that are a hard sell, that are obviously marketing spam, those don't go anywhere. They don't get retweeted, they don't get liked enough to end up showing up in the newsfeed, and it just simply does not work. And so I want to talk a little bit about how you can reframe your brand in a way that actually works as content. And so we'll be going over a little bit about high-level ideas, what works, what doesn't, and what are sort of the new mediums that you guys can get into. But to kick things off, I would love to get a raise of hands and figure out who is in the audience right now so we can tailor this panel to you guys as best as possible. So maybe we get a raise of hands of people who are community managers or run social media directly for companies or brands. Awesome. What about sort of like higher level marketers, PR, people who are maybe managing that stuff on a higher level with a layer of abstraction? Awesome. What about like strict advertisers, old school? Cool, perfect. You don't belong in social media anyways. We got any like developers, founders, builders here? Awesome. Big fan of the builders. Cool. So from that, we're going to try to tailor this as much as possible to be actionable and actually give you strategies you can use and go home with, rather than sort of dancing around the high level of what this all means to our hearts. So talking a little bit about what you can actually do. I'd love to kick off the panel by asking the panelists, how do you set the tone for social media? How do you figure out how to portray your brand in social media? Vanessa, you can start off.
Sure.
So a couple of things I think are critically important. As first and foremost is, who are you? What do you do? What is your story? Who are your customers, and who are you trying to reach? Depending on those things, I think that's where you really start thinking about how are you going to reach them? What makes the most sense as far as social media channels to utilize, because not every channel is appropriate for different audiences. If you're trying to reach developers, there's a certain kind of strategy you want to use for that. If you're trying to reach gamers, it's totally different. And the other piece I think that's really important is actually the content strategy around that. And will there be somebody that is actually responsible for that and committed to that program? First and foremost. So depending on the stage you're at and the company's development and phase, and what it is that your business objectives are with creating a program that's social.
Yeah, I think for us, it does start with that core question of brand, and this isn't a panel about branding, but for me it's really understanding the question, why do you exist as a business and what do you believe in? And you have to go there, there's a big exercise of understanding that. Once you have that, then it's marrying that with, so who cares, right? Who cares about that? Who are you trying to reach? What is your core audience? And social media is just a channel to reach your audience like any other channel. The thing about social media that makes it unique and makes it interesting is that it's a two-way dialogue. It actually allows for conversation and allows for relationship building. And so, to Vanessa's point, social media is a pipe, it's a megaphone, it's a channel. Without content, it's really nothing. And so, people talk about content strategy, people talk about social media strategy, but I really believe it is one and the same. And so, to figure out what content to produce really marries this question of why do you exist, and what are your core beliefs, and what are your benefits, and who cares, who is your audience, and the content is the thing that bridges those two things, because if you can marry the concept of your brand with what your audience cares about, all of a sudden your content will be relevant. So, to bring that into a real example, for Eventbrite, when we were just starting, when I joined Eventbrite, people asked me what my budget was when I joined. This was pre-VC funding. I think I had $10,000 for the first year. The core strategy was social media and content because it was my time. And I interviewed Cass on one of, I think, her very first FailCon events to find out to get inside the head of the event organizer. Because why we existed, to put this into real terms, was we existed to help event organizers do what they were passionate about and be more successful at it. And so our audience were event organizers who were trying to get their businesses off the ground. Especially in the early days, these were entrepreneurs, really small businesses, individuals that just had an idea and wanted to gather people around it, and what they cared about was getting more people to their event. So our content was all about how these real life people were getting people to their events. So I interviewed Cass for our blog, and I said, what's FailCon about? Why is it unique? What did it take to put on this event? And what are you doing to market it? And that became a key piece of content that we then shared out through social media. And I leveraged Cass's social media presence because she shared that content with her followers. I shared it with ours. And together we were able to build conversation and audience around it. And so I think social media, how does your brand, to bring it back to your original question, how does your brand show up in social media is really about marrying this idea of who you are, why you exist, and the audience and what they care about, and that sweet spot, that perfect moment in social media is where you actually are talking about something that's relevant to them, and you can engage in conversation and dialogue around it using the advantage of social media, which is that you can have a conversation.
Totally. So to try to put that into a more formal framework, I really like to work backwards whenever possible. Envision your destination, what your goal is, and then work back to how you get there. So first off, you got to know who are your customers? Who are the people that are actually going to buy your product, or who are your fans? Who are your audience? And sometimes that means getting out of the building. So I think a huge issue with both building products and marketing products is that people don't actually have a very concrete understanding of the people that they're marketing or building for. And you can sit in your office all you want with your coworkers trying to figure out like, oh, I think this is what they want. But it's like, you should just walk out of your building and start asking people on the street that seem like they might be your type and just say, is this something you care about? And if you find someone who your product cares about, then go the next step deeper and be like, try to figure out how you can actually market to them. So at the very first, at the highest level, you got to figure out who are the people you're trying to reach. From there, you can learn about what your message is, because each audience has a different message that's going to resonate with them. So, if you're an athletics brand and you're trying to reach, young extreme sports enthusiasts, your brand and your message is obviously going to be very different than if you're like trying to reach golfers. So thinking about who your audience first is critical. From there, you can sort of hone what the message is that you want to send to them. And from there, you can figure out what are the channels that you're actually going to be able to use to reach that audience. Are golfers on Vine? No, they are not. They are probably too old, and Vine is a younger demographic. You're probably, if you were trying to reach extreme sports kids, there is a huge community of those people on Vine and on YouTube, so those would probably be the demographics you want to work on. If you're trying to sell enterprise software, you're probably looking at Twitter, things where there's more thinkfluencership. People who are out there trying to get their name out there, those are the kind of people that are buying enterprise software. So, you start with who your audience is, then you figure out what your message is, and then you figure out what the channel it is for there. And then you finally get back to your brand and who you really are. And crafting content that actually works for that channel channel message and audience is about to me, it's about taking whatever your brand is and aligning it with those people who are your customers, and in a way that is as natural and organic as possible. I like to think of it this way. If people know that your brand is behind the content, it's not content. If it seems like it's an obvious ad for you, if they could expect your logo to show up at the end, you're doing it wrong. It should be something that just feels natural for them to want to watch. Imagine if it was a commercial, you would want it to be like if you cut off the last second of your brand's image, that people would enjoy that content. They would want to watch it again. They would want to share it with other people. And so I think that's like the most base route is figuring out what is it, how do you turn your brand into content? So for instance, if you're an athletics company, you could go with the hard sell of being like, our stuff is really useful and it's dry wicking and it's breathable and nobody's going to give a shit about you. But if you actually look at what is it, who are the people that you like, who are the messages that you want to share, what are the channels you're using, you could say like, okay, our audience is on Facebook, and right now Facebook video is the best way to have mass reach on Facebook, and you would want to just show real extreme sports, and at the end, you could happen to have them wearing your athletics brand, but at the end, you might show your logo, but the idea is that you don't even need the logo. So that's sort of my general framework for how to work backwards from your goal to your actual content strategy.
Can I just add something to that? I think
yes, I've talked enough.
I totally agree with everything Josh said, and I think our rule of thumb is that through our social media channels, we don't talk about ourselves more than a quarter of the time. For every 4 posts, 1 has some mention of Eventbrite. The other 3, if we're talking to event organizers, are other articles that we found that are interesting to that audience. Other profiles, like we share a lot of other people's content because we want to build that credibility that we understand who our audience is and what they care about, and we want to share with them and have discussions with them around this content regardless of whether it's promoting us or not. In fact, we explicitly don't want to feel self-promotional, because the other thing is to think about your audience in these channels, whether it's Facebook or Twitter or even LinkedIn or Snapchat or Vine or whatever. People are there not to be advertised to. That's not why they're engaging with these platforms. They're engaging for probably a couple of really simple reasons, which is like they want to be entertained, or they want to learn something, or they want to keep up to speed with the zeitgeist. And so you have to enter the conversation in a way that meets those needs. Like we were having a discussion about a lot of platforms are actually adding more kind of promotion or advertisement into the flow. And it's like, if I'm having a conversation with you, like, we're not going to stop and watch an ad. That's not like a normal behavior. But if somebody walks up and says, oh, I have something to add to the conversation, and it's really interesting, like, they may be a brand, but if it's relevant to the conversation, we're much more likely to let them in. So I think it is important to think about the context in that way. Something to say?
Sure.
Well, in addition to all of the things these two have said, I think the most important piece about it is also how do you build those things, right? Like all of these amazing campaigns and ideas and creative, but without having tools and without actually knowing how to use them, and more importantly, knowing what to do with the data from those tools, then it's harder to really identify what those audiences want and need and how to best reach them and at what times and with what kind of content. So depending on if you're, utilizing Snapchat for something, if you're a consumer brand, or if you're using Twitter, if you're a B2B or a LinkedIn, you still really want to be able to know when the highs and lows are, what people are clicking, and what content is important, so that way you can also easily on the fly, if you're a social media marketing manager, that you can switch that or change that or respond back. So I think the other piece of it is your response time to your audience and how will you engage to keep that dialogue flowing and going. So I think as you were saying, it's really about who you're going to and who you want to talk to, but it also depends on timing and how long those campaigns are running for as well.
So enough buzzwords, let's talk actual concrete examples. So I want to hear a little bit about what you guys think are some really great examples of social media. So I saw one recently. When I think of Jameson, I think of the joy of getting drunk. And so I was really amazed when they captured that in this advertisement that they put on Facebook. It was a Facebook video, but it didn't look like a video. It looked like it was 3 photographs. And if you've ever seen, sometimes in Facebook stories in the newsfeed, they'll have like 3 photos next to each other with like little white lines that sort of divide them. And so what Jameson did was they shot a video that at first it looks like you're just sort of looking at a bartender splayed across these 3 images, but then the bartender like pours a shot of Jameson and then reaches almost 3-dimensionally through the frame with his hand coming out of one panel and over the white barrier that's actually a fake barrier between the fake photos. And he reaches over that barrier so you suddenly have this 3D feel, and he's literally handing you the shot. And that to me, it was like, that's what I like about Jameson, is when people hand it to me. And so I loved that campaign, and I liked it, and I tweeted about it, and later, like that week, I ended up seeing a bunch of my friends who are not really especially drunk people, but were sharing it organically. They didn't like Jameson's page or anything, but they had seen it from one of their friends, and they thought it was cool enough, and it captured that identity of the brand well enough that they shared it organically, and that campaign is crushing it right now. And so looking at, there's a few things inside of that when we look at it, both it captures the brand identity really well in a really authentic and natural way. It's not trying to be like, oh, it's aged in special barrels. I'm like, I don't give a shit about that. Just tell me how much alcohol's in it. But also it was taking advantage of mediums in an innovative and new way. It was looking at, okay, what is working right now on Facebook? Video is working right now. Facebook just sort of got really serious about video. They want more people uploading video, and they want to have more video ads because they're very lucrative. And so in order to do that, to mask those ads, they're promoting video content in the feed because it makes it so when you see a video ad, it doesn't seem that weird because you're already seeing other videos. And so they really struck upon that idea, like, oh, video is working, we're going to create a video ad for Facebook. And then they looked at what is it actually like to experience content on Facebook, and how can we sort of play on that? Like what subterfuge can we use that takes advantage of that medium and does something unique with that medium? And I think that was why that campaign really struck me as something super successful.
Okay, 2 examples. So I actually feel like I haven't seen any really great social media campaigns lately. I don't know how you guys feel, but I was trying to think through, my feed recently and what was the last thing that really took off. And honestly, it's an example of something that's both good and bad. And it's bad because I can't remember what it was for. But it's good because everyone was doing it. It was the Ice Bucket Challenge, right? And that was for a charity. And I can't remember the cause. It might have been ALS. Okay, yes. It was ALS.
You're insensitive.
But the thing is, everyone on my newsfeed was dumping ice over their heads. But I think it lost the whole... So, okay, 2 things. One is, it's interesting that it gained so much traction. Everybody was doing this. And any marketer would wish for that kind of traction, to get like people around the world doing something and posting videos of themselves doing that one thing over and over and over again. The bad thing about it was, A, I forgot what charity it was for, what cause it was for, but B, if you think about what actually people were doing, it was like donate to this charity or dump a bucket of ice on your head, which I think was the thing. And so people were dumping up buckets of ice on their head and not donating to the charity. So I don't think, I would be curious to know how much money that actually raised. I don't know if you know. Or,
That's a lot.
was it a lot in the end?
40 million.
Okay. All right. So then, never mind. My example's really bad. Okay. So forget that example. The other thing that I've seen from us work really well was so in our effort to become more consumer focused, to become a brand that people think of when they think of what to do tonight. We started this campaign that we internally call the FOMO campaign, where we send people from Eventbrite out to events, and they take pictures, and then the next day we post them online, and we say, like, did you miss this? And we try to find really kind of wacky, interesting events. So there was like a doggy fashion show, or this pop-up yoga class in this bar that like wouldn't normally have happened. And we take pictures and we post them, and we say, like, this thing happened last night, trying to elicit that fear, like that FOMO, just that fear of missing out. And then we say, don't worry, like there are a lot of other things you can do and ways you can get out in San Francisco. And sometimes we'll share things that are on Eventbrite, sometimes we'll share things that aren't on Eventbrite. But we've seen amazing, this has maybe been our most successful social media campaign to date. And it's really interesting because we are acting like your friends would act on social media. People post pictures of fun, interesting things that they've done. So I think like there's something in that for us to learn from, and because we actually haven't been successful on the organizer side with social media, with paid social media. So we've gone out and tried to buy ads, and I think for us, trying to reach the organizer community through social media is just too hard. Like it has been, in many ways, a really, really difficult thing to figure out because there aren't event organizers everywhere, but there are people that go to events everywhere. And so for us to realize, okay, maybe Facebook is a better mechanism to drive the attendee side of the business has been a really important realization for us, and we are shifting a lot of our weight and our effort and our resources to think about that audience because they're much more willing to engage on that platform for us.
Thanks. So I have a couple of examples. They're kind of, one's a startup, one's media, the other one's consumer. The first one that I feel was really funny and well done and thought out and very clever was the IKEA book campaign. And they did such a funny and great just mimic of Apple and how Apple, showcases these amazing features and the products and this and this. And the fact of the matter was that IKEA's catalog was just as enticing, if not more. And it made you want one. It made you want to look at one and turn the pages. It was amazing. And it was so clever and witty that it took off and it was viral. And that to me was really a well thought out and executed understanding of actually their audience, because most of these people that like IKEA probably use Apple products. So that to me was a really interesting and engaging and fun example.
It was even better than that horse meat campaign.
Right? Yeah. The other example that is very recent, and I will tell you, I love urban stuff, and I'm a huge fan of the show called Empire. And tell me how many of you are fans. Raise your hands. Don't be shy. I know you love Cookie. So, that show right now is done such an incredible job of not just, and it shows you several levels of social media and content working beautifully together. It's essentially the writing. The writing has been done so that people can hashtag things and do things on Instagram. And they've made it so that, Cookie has her own Instagram called Cookie's Closet, and you can look at her clothes. And so as a millennial or as anybody that's into urban, culture and speech and references, and some of the things she says on TV, they instantly become hashtag memes, and you're like, bye Felicia, and if you know that meme, it's from Friday, so the movie. And so it's just like all these amazing, things that, the New York Times is writing about it, and you've got now media coverage, and everybody's obsessing about this show and can't wait, and now, celebrities want to be on it. So I mean, if that isn't amazing writing and just a combination of, video power and Instagram and Facebook and all of them working together, it's really very cool. The last one I have is actually more on the side of, most of you guys know, Lyft, Uber, Sidecar, and I think that one of the communities and that's done a really good job is Sidecar, and they really wanted to get the stories of the drivers and build a lot of community around that, and I thought that brought a humanity to the actual service and the way that people wanted to connect, and especially taking into consideration the drivers, who are their most valuable asset to the company. And there's still very hot competition here in San Francisco, but the folks that I would talk to is I'm very interested in what all these companies are doing, so I follow them very closely on their communications tactics. I felt like out of most of the people that I've driven all three, they were the ones that were the most like, I love them, they're so amazing, and they care about us, and they really want to hear our stories. And I've met people that have made an impact in my life because I got in their car and we started talking and da-da-da-da. And I mean, that's just incredible to have that human connection when you're driving with someone and not have it be forced and not have it also be just like, I hate Uber, So those are my three examples of just current things that I've seen and that have really stuck out to me.
So I actually wrote the thesis of my cyber sociology master's about the concept of what I call symbiotic memes, which is what the ALS challenge falls into. And it basically is this concept. So if you create a meme which has a discernible template where there are easily substituted portions of the template, you will get people to remix your content for you. And what happens then is people will share their own original creations, and that will drive attention back to the original. And so what happened with the ALS challenge was, somebody started this, and it was really obvious what you were supposed to do. It was like, instead, it's like you basically just dump a bucket of ice water on your head. And what's different is that it's you instead of somebody different. But if you wanted to break it down a little bit more granularly, why was that special? It was because the reaction you get when somebody pours ice water on themselves is both it's a very unique expression of emotion, of pain and glee and surprise. And almost anyone, no matter who they are, looks funny when this happens to them. And what happened was that because of that, everyone wanted to see each of their friends do it. It wasn't something that got boring with each new incarnation. It didn't ever feel tired, because it didn't matter if you were seeing your best friend do it or Mark Zuckerberg do it. It felt interesting and different each time, because most people, especially public figures, you never get to see them in that vulnerable state. And so if you want to create media that I think really goes to the next level, it's about understanding this concept of symbiotic memes and thinking about how can you create a template where it's obvious what to remix or what to substitute, and you can actually seed those remixes by creating a few alternate versions yourself, where you sort of show the original meme, but then you also show these variations where you're substituting out things. So the Harlem Shake is the perfect example of this. So I actually revisited my thesis and wrote a recap of how it was played out with the Harlem Shake, where basically it was you knew exactly what to do. You got a bunch of friends, you stood still for the first 5 seconds, and then you went crazy for the next 10 seconds. And that was it. And everyone knew how to do it. You watched it once, you're like, oh, I know how to make my own version of that. And every version was interesting. And so if you can build that symbiosis, that template into your memes or your campaigns, I think you can have amazing viral success.
Have you ever seen a brand do that?
Have I ever seen a brand? Yes.
Yeah.
So Cadbury cream eggs had one of the most successful ad campaigns of all time about a decade ago. And they were in a make or break situation. They had just had sort of a tainted Cadbury egg situation where basically some of them were poisoned coming off the line. And the brand was in shambles. Sales were just plummeting. Everything was going wrong. If this campaign didn't work out, it was over for Cadbury, one of these extremely long-standing English candy brands. But instead, they created this campaign, and it starts with just this close-up of this gorilla's face. And it slowly pans out, and you see, and what's playing in the background is the really subtle intro to Phil Collins's In the Air Tonight. And what happens is, as it pulls back on the gorilla, you see that the gorilla is actually sitting at a drum set. And right at the end, if you know this song, it's sort of very quiet, but then all of a sudden it's I can feel it coming. And everyone, what happened was they put this commercial on television, and this was like at the very earliest age of YouTube. This is around like 2005, 2006, and people already figured it out. And what they did was they were like, oh, cool, I'm gonna do the exact same thing in a gorilla costume, but I'm gonna substitute a different song, like another cool song that like has a crazy drop with big drums. Or I'm gonna do the exact same thing in the air tonight, but I'm gonna wear a different costume. Or I'm gonna be the monkey, but instead of drumsticks, I'm gonna have bananas that I'm drumming the drum kit with. And people made all these remixes of it, and the remixes all went viral, and everything sort of drove this attention back to Cadbury, and it like saved their brand. So I do think that normal brands can do this. So from here, I want to go into a little bit of failures. Like, what are the worst ways that you can do things? So when I think of failures, I think of a few apps. So I don't know if you guys, do any of you guys use the app Vine? Yeah. It is an amazing app. I highly recommend you check it out. Most people suck at Vine, but that's okay, because Vine is designed to be an oligarchy where you don't watch your friends' Vines. What you do is you go to the little Explore tab, and then you go to the Comedy tab, and you watch these star creators who are literally Vine native. This is their medium, and they make the funniest, craziest videos there. But what's developed is because these people all have these massive audiences of millions of fans who are glued into their little 6-second clips, these brands have come in and started to try to pay different Vine stars to make Vines for them. And when it's done right, it feels super natural. It's like, oh, somebody's like, you know, they're on a date and they're at a restaurant, and it just happens to be that the restaurant is the brand, but otherwise you couldn't even tell. Or it's like, you know, someone's brushing their teeth and there's like crest on the countertop, but the Vine isn't about brushing your teeth. That just happens to be how it starts. But there are this slew of really shitty brands like Badoo and Hot or Not, and some of these like sort of crappy dating apps especially. And what they've done is they've gone on to Vine, and they've found these stars. And normally the stars want to preserve their own personal brand. They don't want to like sell out and make crappy content that's going to annoy their audience. But these companies come in with enough money, and they're just like, we don't care. We don't want you to like. We just want you to make it as obvious as possible that like download Badoo. And so literally that's like what the Vine is. So like you're scrolling through somebody's Vines, and it's like all these cool little skits and videos, and then it's somebody being like, Badoo is like a really great app. Like if you're lonely, you should download Badoo. And you're like, this is the worst ad ever. Unfollow. And you hate. You know, not only do you like hate the creator, you also hate the platform for even allowing this, and you definitely hate the brand for like ruining and making one of your like favorite star creators sell out. And so if you're ever trying to work with star creators or do anything around social media with marketing, being that hard sell, that like, you know, looking straight at the camera, just telling them what you want them to do, it doesn't work. So like, please don't.
Yeah, I think some of the biggest failed campaign, or not even campaigns, social media moves have been when brands try to hijack a moment. And there's something really powerful if you get it right. Like there's the famous like Oreos you can dunk in the dark moment, which was brilliant. And I you know, when they work, they're almost magical because something just happened, and then a brand can tag along on that thing in a really relevant way that feels like, oh my God, how'd they get that together so fast? That's really clever. But if you get it wrong, it can be pretty catastrophic. So because you have to move quickly, a lot of the bigger companies don't have the time to go through, you know, maybe chains of approval for things like that. And there are a couple of recent examples of this, which was like there was a retail brand on Martin Luther King Day that said like 25% off our black clothing, like, and it's just so it has the wrong taste. It's just so misguided. But like they wanted to do something in the moment, fast, and like latch on to a moment. Or there was I think it was Hurricane Sandy, when one of the retailers said like, "Hey, hurricane special, like you're probably staying in," and meanwhile people were getting displaced. Right, or there is the hashtag recently why I stayed, which is what was around domestic violence and domestic abuse, a very serious topic. And I think it was DiGiorno's Pizza, like didn't realize what the hashtag was about. They just saw it trending on Twitter, so they tweeted like, "Why I stayed, it was the pizza." And so like it can be really, really catastrophic and do a lot of damage to the brand if you don't pay attention to like what the conversation is about, or think about the broader context for the moment that you're trying to like hijack. And so that's where I've sort of seen the biggest mistakes.
It's not worth it.
It's not worth it, yeah. I think for us personally at Eventbrite, we have not been able to make contests work, especially on the event organizer side. And we've tried this a couple times, and I think legitimately failed. I think we call it failure every time. And we felt like we were learning things each time, and we were trying new things. But I think ultimately, what we were trying to do, so the first one we did was a New Year's Eve campaign for event organizers. And the contest was, tell us your dream New Year's Eve event, and this was in 2012, and we'll give you $2,012 to bring it to life. Like, if you could invite 20 people over, or rent out a bar, do whatever, tell us what your dream event is, and we'll fund it. And I think we got like 9 entries. Like, it just didn't work. And we tried another contest a couple years later very similarly, and I think ultimately it's that, and I'd be curious to hear like your thoughts about why this didn't work, but because we have a large social media presence, the community is big enough that if this was interesting, we could get enough people to participate. No one did, and I think it's like we were asking people too much, to do too much, to think too much, to commit to like thinking through an idea and writing it down. And social media is very like instant gratification, read this, swipe, like move on to the next thing, and I think it wasn't the right platform to do that kind of thing. But I don't know if you have other thoughts on
just quick on that.
Yeah, whenever you're dealing with anything with user-generated content, UGC, you have to imagine that you're trying to reduce the friction as low as possible. If you're telling someone like, shoot a 4-minute music video about like why you love our brand, it's like that's just not gonna happen. Like no one's gonna shoot that, and if they do, it's gonna be horrible. Like you have to make it as easy as possible. I mean, something as simple as like just uploading a photo, like even then you're talking about a fair amount of friction. So you really have to think about how can you minimize the effort that somebody has to go in to participate in one of your campaigns. Otherwise, it's just gonna breeze right by people and nobody's gonna wanna do it.
I think on the flip side, on the consumer side, which is where we are finding more traction, one thing we're doing on Instagram right now, which is seeing more and more pickup, is we're tweeting on Tuesdays, like this idea of Ticket Tuesday. There's this upcoming music festival, there's this upcoming great event, tag your friend that you'd want to take and win a free ticket. That on Instagram is working pretty well for us. But that's the first time we've actually been able to see any kind of engagement in sort of a contest-like structure.
Yeah, I think for some reason, like, contests just got played out, and I think everybody overdid them, so we did the same thing. And we would say, let's do a contest, and that was the solution for some reason for, throwing spaghetti against the wall to just check out how a social media program would work or a campaign. And the truth is that it's just boring now. And people want something either that's really easy or engaging. I think they also see through it, oh, we're going to give you something in exchange for some exposure to your friends, and so that becomes harder because you have to be even more witty and clever, right, with how you create the campaign and you create the content. I think moving into that leads me to my next example of bad social. They just keep doing bad social left and right. It's poor McDonald's. I mean, poor guys, I don't know who they're paying to come up with so many of these different social media strategies and not really understanding that people are over them, And so I think that their whole Ronald McDonald campaign that was about, a couple months ago, when they had the new Ronald McDonald clown, and he came out and they're like, oh, look at our new logo, hashtag Ronald McDonald. They wanted to make it all like fun and breezy, and people were just like, you guys kill animals, awful, and you guys suck, and I wouldn't eat your burger, that's like, like all this crazy stuff. And I mean, where was the governance in that, right? And so that's the other piece of it, is when you're doing social media campaigns and you're gonna put yourself out there, especially on Twitter, to be clobbered and trolled as a brand, you better have some foolproof crisis comms to get that nipped in the bud right away. What did they do? What could they do? They couldn't do anything. They couldn't just take Ronald McDonald away, Like, it was there forever, captured in social media sphere. So I think that's the other piece that you have to think about is, that people have feelings towards your brand. And I think sometimes people forget to also test that temperament, that sensitivity, and I think that's where, Josh, all the work that you've been doing is really relevant in that case, and the psychology of what you put out there and how it makes people feel is really important.
Yeah, so I think the real issue there was that like McDonald's was being inauthentic. So another one, they just stumbled into another massive gaffe where around South by Southwest they were like, we want to like get indie bands to come like play at our thing.
That was my next example.
And they were like, but we're not going to pay you. And the bands were like, we are starving bands. You're like the biggest company ever, and you like can't foot us a few $100s to like schlep our gear to your tent or whatever. And they were so pissed, and they just got like endlessly lampooned. And what happens is, whenever if you look at your brand and you say, here's where we are, and we wish we were way over here. If you create media that pretends like you're already over there, you will get skewered. People will come at you so hard because they know that it's inauthentic. It's obvious that that's not what your brand is. Nobody thinks that McDonald's is indie. Like nobody thinks that they're like hip and cool. In some countries, they're surprisingly like are the kind of place people go after hours to hang out. Weirdly enough, but not in the United States. Like they're the lamest amongst the lamest brands around. And so like playing on things that are a little bit hokey, a little bit like homey and family and stuff like that, that's like more aligned with their brand. But when they try to get real hip and cool, they just immediately get destroyed. And so that's one of those things, is looking at like what is authentic and trying not to reach too far. You can reach a little bit and you can try to massage your brand in a direction, but you can't just like grappling hook over to the other side. And another campaign that I personally like went off the rails about was the Uber gay marriage marketing stunt. And so basically around Pride weekend, they were like, we're gonna let you get a free on-demand wedding. And the idea was that like you would, if you were lucky enough to like look at the Uber app at the right time, you could literally call like a wedding car, and they would bring you or someone who was ordained and like a violinist and like the whole sort of like little like carpet or something, a little rig, and they would like do a wedding for you, like a legal wedding for you on the spot, and like take all these photos and post them like on Uber's website or something. And it was just so tone deaf around the concept of gay marriage that it was actually an important thing that was not available all over the place. It's a very sensitive issue. And the idea that they were like, if they wanted to do, if they just done some marriage stunt like randomly, it might have gone on. Maybe they could have done it on like Valentine's Day and it would have been like marriage for everyone. But the fact that they did it around Pride weekend in San Francisco, it was just so obviously trying to like co-op on the like positivity and the empowerment and the like the good vibes around San Francisco around Pride weekend, and they were clearly just trying to shoehorn themselves into that and like steal that good buzz. And I just tore them apart in an article on TechCrunch for it. And it was sad because the guy who called, like the Uber guy who eventually like called me up, he was like, I came up with this campaign, like I'm gay, and like I thought this was good. And I was like, did you ask anyone if this was okay? Because like I asked several of my friends, straight and gay, and everyone was like, that's fucked up, dude. Like they should have never done that. And like when I told that to him, he seemed like completely oblivious. And so it really just like sometimes you can't always see what's right in front of you. So if you're ever dealing with anything that seems like a sensitive topic and you're like, no, this is gonna be fine, like get a few more eyeballs on that campaign before you run it, because you're liable to just dig your own grave. So to talk a little bit about high level, what's happening next? Like what is changing? I'd love to hear what you guys think are sort of some new tactics or tricks that are really coming to fruition right now and are working really well across the different social media apps.
Yeah, I think for us, it's really figuring out video, and we haven't figured it out yet. But I think, and maybe you can speak to this a little bit more, like how do you start creating a video strategy and creating content that people actually want to watch? Like in terms of the autoplay in the Facebook newsfeed and soon to be in the Twitter newsfeed, video is going to become much more pervasive. And it seems to be the way that people actually want to get that quick burst of entertainment. People are watching these 20-second, 30-second Vine videos, Instagram videos, and it's becoming kind of a normal form of consumption. Like I don't know how many of you have looked through like the Discover stuff on Snapchat, but like ESPN's is really interesting. They put these really short video clips of like interesting sports moments, either funny or entertaining, that are literally, I think, 20 or 30 seconds. But it's like this kind of really fast video consumption that I think is super interesting. But I'd love to hear from Vanessa sort of how you think about creating that, because that's definitely something that we're actively thinking about and talking about right now. And then I think, let's see, so there's video, and then content. So back to content. I think content is evolving. Brands are evolving to understand their role with content. We're actually launching a content platform that is separate from a separate brand from Eventbrite called Rally, and is all content about what to do in your city. So in San Francisco, So in San Francisco, what's happening? What are the cool events to go to? What are the things that you should know about? What's the inside scoop about where to go and what to do? Because people are craving that content. People want to read it, and we believe that we can help be an authority there, especially as sort of traditional, some of the traditional folks like 7x7 are really struggling to keep their business model alive, and it's really valuable content, and people love it. And so is there a way to bridge kind of the brands and then some of these sort of traditional entertainment content businesses to keep that content in front of people because people want it, but with a business model that makes sense? And so for us, that's our evolution with content on the consumer side. And we're not just going to be talking about events on Eventbrite because that would be boring and very self-serving, but instead we're going to be talking about the best things to do in your city. And so for us, thinking through that is really interesting, and I think watching a lot of other brands kind of think through this is interesting. I think, certainly GoPro is as much a media company as they are a technology company, and I think that the worlds are merging in a really interesting way as the models are changing.
Yeah. Well, to answer one of your question, I think on the video side, the video piece is really difficult. It is not for everyone, and it's also costly. I mean, depending on if you're going to have like a production studio or you're going to outsource it, and you really want to have someone on your team that really understands that. Like, I actually come from a video production background. That's what I studied in school. And, all of the pieces that go into play, even if you can do it like with your iPhone, or you can meerkat the hell out of, of an event or something, like, you really want to know, like, who's talking? Are they authoritative? Do they know about the content? Like, is it going to be UGC? Like, is it not? There's also a lot of legal implications to that, right? Like, if you have people that you're videotaping that the brand doesn't have a right to, like, I had to give, Cassie a forum, release forum for her videotaping me tonight, So and that was one of the issues with Google Glass too, right? So I'm saying, like, even when you're out there wanting to use a ton of video, there's also actually a lot of governance around that, and then there's also the creative piece to that. Like, how long? How long will the video? You're going to do a lot of testing, a lot of A/B testing, just like you do with a product. Like, how long? What kind of content? Where? When? The list is endless. So I think it is something that more and more companies are going to be doing, because you're right, the demand is there, but it's going to be now the piece where, how do we make it work, and how do we make it interesting and relevant and consistent, right? Because you want to have that consistency just like you have in any other social media channel. The other couple things that I'm seeing from clients that we work with and companies is platforms are becoming much more advanced. So the analytics tools out there and the integration of all those things for you to know really on the fly of how to utilize them for the best advantage to your company are all there. One of my favorites right now is Summall. I love them. I think they're great, and they have everything. I mean, they've integrated SendGrid for you to track from. So I mean, you can even your email campaigns through there is great, and I love them. And then I just think that more and more as you use the data that is there, like as you're creating your plans and stuff, the better that it's going to be for you in the long run. I think a lot of the times we think of social media, we're like, oh, creative, fun stuff to put out. But we work with a lot of B2C and B2B, and the B2B demands on social are like, why should I spend money? Right? And it's like, well, okay, let's think about that. So my job becomes harder to make them want to, and so the analytics and that piece of how do you measure success is really important for them. Consumer, it's like they have that marketing budget, right? They have the money to spend. They're like, yes, we've got $150,000 just for Twitter, right? And I mean, most startups don't. So we have to be really clever with the kind of programs and things that we help them. So we try to look at a lot of, analytics tools that are out there, new ways to do content as well. And we are actually doing a ton of stuff on Reddit for example. So we do a lot of Reddit AMAs with really interesting topics that go to specific like developers, for example. It's a great tool for that. And then on the content side, there's places like Contently, for example, that now you can actually outsource a lot of your content creation, and for not having to write like a whole staff of writers and things like that. And it actually has been useful. We've had a couple clients use that, and they've been very happy with the results. So you have to be creative if you don't have the manpower. Now more and more, you're seeing a lot of products and services that are for us marketers and people in comms, to make our lives easier and to also be able to, show success of the programs that we create. So I'm excited about that piece. So.
I have definitely not signed a model release form. I actually haven't signed one since I used to go to these raves, and what they would do was, it was out in the middle of the marshlands on the edge of San Francisco and Hunters Point, and what they would do is when you went in, everyone would sign this model release form, and you're like, why would you do that? And the idea was that if the cops ever come, we're not having a rave, we're shooting a rave movie. Surprisingly, actually kept people safe. But to talk a little bit about like actionable things, so Facebook video is huge, but what you have to understand is that Facebook video is not like any other video on the internet because it is autoplay. And so what that means is that when somebody goes to a YouTube video and they actively click a link and they're waiting for it to start, they expect there to be some kind of slow intro, something that's like a title screen or somebody introducing what's about to happen, and they're expecting that. But on Facebook, if you put that at the bottom, at the beginning of your video, that is suicide for your video, because it is immediately going to start rolling, and the first seconds are what most people are the only seconds people are going to see. So it needs to be visually engaging from the very first moment. And so we learned this at TechCrunch. When we would do sort of in-studio interviews, that stuff would never go anywhere on Facebook, because the first scene is always like me being like, hey, I'm Josh from TechCrunch TV, and I'm here with founder Joe. And it would just, like, it never looked interesting. But when we started doing, when we realized what was going on, we started making the first frames of our videos like a little cool intro of what was going on. Like here, like we would do product demos or event coverage, and we'd immediately have action shots, cool looking products, interesting looking visuals, lots of color, lots of movement, things that are immediately eye-grabbing. And you have to do that with autoplay video, whether it's on Facebook or on some of these other mediums that are evolving. You literally get 1 second to grab people. So if it's boring in the first second, it's over. Another technique that you touched on that I think is working really well, that BuzzFeed says is huge for them right now, is tag a friend. So rather than a call to action of like broadcast this to a feed, which honestly a lot of people are apprehensive to do because they feel like they're spamming their friends, when instead it's like, this video is like, annoying things that your roommate does, and it's like, sponsored by some home cleaning company that will clean your apartment if your roommate is messy. And their idea is like, tag your messiest friend and things like that, and it works really well because you might think like, oh, the viral coefficient is so low, each person is only sharing to one other person, but it works because the people who watch those videos, they have a really good active lead into it. They have a reason. It's not just like somebody threw it up there on Facebook. It was like somebody specifically sent it to them, and I think that makes it work so much better and is so much more vivid. I'm huge on the idea of using star creators. Most brands don't understand new mediums. You probably don't understand Vine or Snapchat. Like, just handle that, like accept that. But there are people who are great at it. They are native creators. They've come up experimenting on these mediums. They've figured out what actually works. And they are the ones who understand how to make people watch and click and revine and share. And if you try to just sort of port your normal kind of content from other mediums into these new mediums, you're going to fail. And I really think the way to do it is, instead of paying 2 people over 6 months to try to like build your following on something like Vine, screw that. Pour that entire budget into one great Vine created by a star creator who is frequently on the popular page and has a few millions of followers. Have them do something that feels like an organic way of embodying your brand. So for instance, 2 great Vines that I've seen recently. One was for Honda Civic, and basically they found like a music guy who makes cool sort of drum beats and beatboxes, and what he did was he made a hip hop beat out of like closing the windows and the doors and the trunk and the windshield wipers, and he cut it all together to make it sound like a beat. And literally this, I think when Honda did this campaign, in one Vine, they got 5 times as many like revines and followers than they had from paying a team of people for 6 months beforehand. Really looking at star creators and native creators to your platforms are a special way. And then finally, get on new platforms early. When new platforms start, everyone is looking for people to follow. So if you see now, nobody wants to follow anyone on Twitter because it's an unfiltered feed, and you lose anybody that you really care about when you add more people. And so if you add a single noisy person and it drowns out the like one person that you love but only tweets twice a week. And so people become apprehensive to follow people and to create connections over time because they sort of hit a bandwidth. But when new mediums start, everyone wants to follow new people on Snapchat right now because everyone's sort of getting into that and nobody knows who to follow. Everyone wants to follow people on these live streaming apps like Meerkat. So getting on these platforms early can be really successful because you can gain that sort of windfall. As people come in and they're trying to figure out who to follow, they might be willing to follow you. And you know what? Experiment with it. Try a few things. And if the medium itself fails and goes away, you've really lost very little. But if it does end up blowing up and you are one of those brands like Taco Bell that got onto Snapchat super early, they have huge viewerships now, and it's doing extremely well for them because they were willing to make a bet early. So I recommend making those early bets.
Can I add one quick thing?
Sure.
Just one quick point, and this may just seem super obvious, but I think it's worth calling out because we see this a lot actually with event organizers trying to advertise for their events and build their communities on these various channels. Like a lot of times we'll have people that we talk to say like we tried to do these things on Snapchat or on Vine and it just wasn't successful. And I think it comes back to like really understanding where we started the panel, your audience. And if your audience isn't on these platforms, like it's really, you're just wasting your effort because you're never going to reach the people you're trying to reach. And like that may be just like to such a basic point. I don't know.
But it's so critical. I mean, that's the main thing. Like if you don't know where they are, you are wasting your time. And I tell clients left and right, like, no, we're not going to do Snapchat.
Do not put your enterprise software.
You know what I'm saying? Like, no. And for others, that are doing really cool apps or have a game or something like that, I'm like, yes, we need a YouTube channel. Yes, we need this and that. So it really is so dependent on who they are and what they need, and I can't agree with you more on that. So, a lot of folks, and depending on the age group too. And so with video though nowadays, like it's much easier to be able to target, especially mobile. So you can use other, interesting platforms and advertising networks and things like that to also, integrate those things, right, and cross promote. So.
Cool, so now we'd love to take some questions from the crowd. It can be sort of strategy questions, but also I love it if just people are like, here's my brand, what should I do? Like, I think it'd be fun for us to sort of try to brainstorm some ideas. So because we don't have microphones to go around, just say your question, I'll sort of repeat it just in case people didn't hear it. So, that guy.
Hey, thanks guys, that was a lot of great content. I got 3 actionable things that I just texted to myself.
What are we from them too?
And it's my first Failchat. My name is Jim Nickerson. I'm the lead instructor for digital marketing at General Assembly.
Nice.
But I also am the social media strategist for the San Francisco Payments Chorus. And that is who I'm here on behalf of today. Something that I think is a really big potential fail for us is how we engage with millennials. We see the population of our 300-member chorus being pear-shaped with many guys from 20 to 30. For a nonprofit like us, they're potentially new revenue to reach out to them through fundraising campaigns. So I think the millennials are getting a lot of lip service, but can you give me an example of maybe something you tried or something you haven't, or how you're advising your clients, or what stories you're writing about making millennial outreach effective?
So I think like millennials are very interested in super lean and focused experiences. These are people that grew up on mobile where you do one thing at a time, not on the web where you have like 20 tabs open simultaneously. And I think that's really taught them the idea of like something very discreet and simple and focused. Yeah. So rather than trying to like explain all the great things about your brand, like hone in on one specific thing that you think might resonate with them and just hammer that home with like a very simple campaign. I think that works a lot more successfully than trying to go the more like logical overview route that I think resonates more with older audiences.
So I'm going to take the event angle of that because this is like something that actually we're actively working on with a lot of our the event organizers in the performing arts space, and it's sort of across the board. And the interesting thing about millennials is, we certainly at Eventbrite think of them as the experience generation. They aren't spending their money on things; they're spending their money on experiences, and they're defining themselves, creating their identities based on the things that they do, and their ability to share that with the broader audience through social media or through messaging apps, things like that. The things that I've seen really creative in the performing arts space are actually creating really unique experiences tailored for millennials. So like the Soundbox experience that the symphony is doing, that is absolutely tailored to reach a different demographic, right? The people that go to the symphony are the same people that go to the symphony every year, and they're trying to reach a new audience. And so they're creating new experiences, like the Soundbox experience is not in Davies Hall, it's in a completely different space, and it's a completely different immersive experience. And so I think you have a really amazing opportunity because your product actually can morph, and you can actually create tailored experiences for this audience who are looking for something really unique. So maybe it's the venue, or maybe it's the format, or maybe it's a way you interact with the audience, but I think there's a lot of opportunity and things that you can play with, and then you can use social media to amplify that, whatever that unique thing is, so that people have that FOMO, like, oh my God, that looks so cool, I want to go to the next one.
I agree with a lot of what you're saying. I think the other piece where people don't understand about millennials is that because they are so mobile, like the content they want is just really quick and accessible. So even if it's in an app format, I know a lot of them really like that you're constantly updating.
No, it's fine.
Someone's stuck in the elevator.
Is that us needing to stop?
Nobody's dead. Nobody's dead.
No.
Proceed.
This is only a test. What I was saying is, I think also reaching them through different mediums and trying to get to them through video, again, is also really important. I think if you guys were to be able to get your content out, like on YouTube and those kinds of channels, I think Snapchat with them is really, really huge, as well as Line. And testing those things out, right? Because you want them to become long-term members of General Assembly, not just like turn around, right? You want to keep them for a long period of time. And I think a lot of brands have that sort of proposition. They want to keep them for a long time. They want to be authentic, and they just don't know how. And I also think the voice that you choose is important. So even in the branding exercises that we do, we go through a pretty intensive process with our clients, whether B2C, B2B, whatever, or even individuals that we also work with, is who do they want to sound like? Like how do they want to be relatable, right? Because you want to be personable, you want to have a human touch to your brand, and I think that's what scares a lot of the bigger established brands. And what you see with the newer ones is that they're more willing to be, just rogue. You look at some of the things like Urban Outfitters does, and they're crazy, but they're so massive even still, and millennials love them because they're crazy and they do, things that are not the norm, and so they're not the status quo, right? They are going to put that crazy sweatshirt with the crazy random sayings on them, and people are like that are older are going to go crazy and freak out, but to regular millennials, no, that's chill, it's not a big deal, so you're going to see those kinds of things. So I happen to work with a couple of millennials. We have them on our team, so I kind of know how they think, and I think that's also important, is that you surround yourself with them. I used to be in a place where I was like, I will not hire them, they're entitled, and now I'm like, oh no, we actually love the way they think. So yeah.
Child labor works, people. Cool. Next question.
Hello, thank you. My name is Rando. I'm the founder of 5 Orbits, which is an app for young professionals. You get feedback from their friends about their strengths and natural abilities. And it's pretty early phase still. I'm working on proving the product market fit, proving that there's a need. So I need to get the first, let's say, 500 users to work with them. So do you have any recommendations? What should I do to get those first 500 users?
One thing you run through sort of the rubric that we were talking about earlier. It's like, okay, if you know that you're trying to reach younger professionals, okay, I get that. So then where do you think that those people hang out? They're probably more likely on Twitter, maybe Facebook, probably not like the younger tweens who are on sort of the newer mediums. Then you want to think like, what is the true value add of your program? And it's about education and understanding your strengths and weaknesses, and so that you can, refine yourself and, promote the things that you're actually good at. And so then it's looking at, how do you create a piece of content that really captures that? And so maybe it's like a bunch of people being super honest with a friend, and everyone's like, everyone's telling them, like, maybe it's a bunch of people being like, oh yeah, we really love you, like, you're great. And then like the one like sort of petulant friend is like, you actually suck at this. And they're like, oh wait, that's actually the only useful thing I heard today, or something. Something about that honesty and the candidacy. I think that works. But also, like the first users that you should be getting, a really great tactic that is very commonly used is buying Google ads, like buying just buying small Google ads and trying out a whole bunch of different calls to action, ways of branding yourself, all these different taglines, and figure out which ones actually get clicks. It's super easy to just run, $20 worth and figure out what's actually getting clicks, and sort of refine from there what your message is that actually resonates with people.
I just have one thing maybe to add, which I think is really crucial when you're thinking about your first users, maybe your first 500, is really understanding the pain point that you're solving, because that's what people will react to. If people have an existing need, an existing pain, and you say, hey, I can solve that, then people will react. But if you say, like, I have this random thing, and people are like, well, I don't know what I would use it for, or then it's harder to incite action. So I think like it starts with talking to people that will actually use your product and really understanding what that pain point is, or on the flip side, what the benefit is that's really going to resonate. And then we absolutely did that very early on in Eventbrite, which is what Josh suggests, which you can create a series of Google AdWords ads with different value propositions in them that speak to the various pain points. And you can see, well, first of all, like the keyword volume for each of them, how many clicks do each generate, and then you can experiment with the landing pages that those ads go to, and you can have the value proposition, that key benefit that you provide, or speak directly to the pain point, and you're basically multivariate testing all of the different potential benefits to figure out what should be like the main selling proposition for what you're trying to do, and how you can continue to grow that audience. But I almost like wouldn't start on social media. Like you have to start really understanding who those users are, and Google is actually a great way to get like some mass feedback on what's going to resonate. But to Josh's earlier point in the conversation, like talk to those people, because it's going to be really hard to figure out what that key benefit is, or what that key pain point is that you're solving without talking to them. And you're probably already doing this, but I just want to say that.
I would say the same thing, but before that. So focus group, get some people that are in the age group, do a focus group, sit down with them, show them what it is, get them their feedback. That'll help you do some iterations. Then messaging. What do? Position that. What is your value proposition? Write it out, see what sticks. And then go into SEO and Google AdWords. But before you have a narrative, before you have a story, you can't just not know what people want. Right? So a focus group is always something that we've done, and I think it works so great for any kind of new technology or things that are like going to be hard to understand, or you don't know what the need is, or you have questions about what the product does or how people are going to use it.
Cool. So look back as an overview over what are the things that we sort of come to, the conclusions we've thought of. At the very root level, social media marketing is about creating content, not advertising. It's things that take the value add of your brand and extrapolate them into natural ways that people want to experience that value add. It's not about the hard sell. When you're talking about ways to figure out what you should be doing, use that work backwards method of figuring out who your customers are, which means getting out of the building and actually talking to humans that are not in your team. Then figuring out what is the channel that you're going to be able to reach those people through, and what message works in that channel, and then you can start to craft what your actual message is. In terms of good campaigns, we see things that really take advantage of new mediums and special little quirks in those mediums, things that feel like a really authentic and natural way of expressing a brand that aren't too reaching, that aren't inauthentic because they're trying to be something that the brand is not. And there are other great strategies include working with star creators who can make medium-specific content for you. Working, if you're doing things with video, make sure that if you're doing autoplay video, that the first few seconds are really interesting. If you're doing things where you're trying to get traction, talk about tagging friends and getting people to specifically share to one person rather than just always broadcasting. When you're looking at bad things, avoid trying to capitalize on those big moments if you don't really know what you're doing. Whenever you're dealing with a controversial space or a sensitive area, make sure you get plenty of eyes on your campaign before you run something. And in the end, look to experiment. There's so many new mediums, there's so many new opportunities popping up every day. But if you just sort of stay really tight and stodgy, you end up looking like one of those old brands. But if you're willing to take a shot, fail when necessary, you'll be able to find that it's not just social media, it's really social. It's community that you can galvanize from that media. So thanks again for coming, you guys.
Thank all three of you for the great kickoff conversation. Our first FailCon in a while. Awesome speakers, great tips. I have a bunch that I'll try and tweet out later. For some reason I couldn't get my Twitter tonight, ironic. Thank you all for coming. We have a little bit of beer, soda, water left. We do have to get out of Galvanize at 9:20. They close at 9:30. So you got a little bit of time to network if you want. Otherwise, enjoy the evening. Thank you again. A wonderful round of applause for our speakers. Hopefully, I will see all of you on the web and social media again soon.